Think of a time when you experienced a conversation that left you with a new perspective, or perhaps an inquiry, or you might have felt that something has shifted in you after that conversation. Maybe it helped you gain a new level of clarity, or moved you to take action. That was a coaching conversation. Hello and welcome to the Coaching Conversation. This is your host, Salah Al-Laythi, and I'm here with Ewan O'Leary. Ewan is a leadership coach, organizational coach, and facilitator based in sunny Florida. I believe we met a few years back in New York at the very first event of Business Agility Conference. I think that was the first time we met in person, and but we met online, I think before that through IC Agile. So I am really excited to have you, Ewan. Welcome.
Yeah, well, thank you, Salah. Yeah, it was, I think it was like February of 2017 or something like that. And I think we were both involved in facilitating the table conversations at the Business Agility Conference, the inaugural Business Agility Conference. A lot of fun. Quite a radical, I think for its time, a radical experiment and a bit of a departure from the standard approach to conferences, which obviously Evan and the organizing committee and the folks who put that together, I really appreciated, the opportunity to go and experiment in that way, particularly with a lot of business folk who may not necessarily have otherwise experienced something a little atypical like that. So it was a good experience, a good connecting experience. I'm glad we sort of have the bond of some folks who've engaged in some experiments in structure and facilitation and so on together. So thank you for the welcome, Salah.
I know we wanted to have a theme, and that's a good segue around the conversation. But before we go down that path, explore that, just a little bit about how did you get to where you are today as far as your coaching journey and professional journey?
Yeah, absolutely. Like many folks in our community, I can sort of point to Lisa Atkins and Michael Spade as, I guess, the first people that I encountered that presenced professional coaching skills to me way back in 2013 or 2014, when I started down the path of sort of exploring what it means to me to have an impact in the way that I like to have an impact. I'd like to have an impact in the world. And a lot of my own deep internal work kind of tended to show up, at least initially. And a lot of my own internal work has gone into sort of supporting myself on the journey. I think I sort of look at it and kind of on balance, the work that I've done in coaching schools is somewhat secondary to the work that I've done with and on myself. And then I've also engaged in this idea that to really do this effectively, you've got to understand a lot of different contexts. So I've moved from context to context to context. Sometimes between 6 and 9 months is my usual duration with an organization, with a client organization, but sometimes it's shorter than that. And in so doing, I've created quite a sort of a repertoire of, I would say, skills or capabilities or trauma memories, I don't know, but just sort of understanding and being aware of and being sensitive to how different organizations sort of look at this idea of agile transformation and what transpires for people, for individuals who are sort of facing this kind of a shift or the expectation of this kind of a shift in their world. I'm seeing a lot of myself and a lot of my personal work kind of come through now in the work that I'm doing from a coaching standpoint. And that to me is just sort of testament to the, I guess, kind of the power of the people who've been my teachers in this space.
I had different folks from the Agile community on this podcast, and every time I ask that question, I can almost always predict that Lisa and Michael names will come up as far as how they were pioneers in introducing the Agile practitioners to professional coaching and the skills that are associated with that. So we talked a little bit about the theme of what we want to explore today, and you mentioned something about connected conversation, and I really like that topic because I named this podcast The Coaching Conversation. Usually one of the things that I really like to do is to connect conversation that has some sort of connection, but that's, like you said, it's not just a coaching conversation, but it's any conversation that you want to have with someone. So what do you mean when you say connected conversation?
So it's connecting or connected conversation. And what I'm really talking about there is I'm talking about, those conversations that you can have when you are in relationship with someone beyond perhaps just the cursory or superficial level that often emerges in a place where you're, working, particularly with a little bit of a traditional mindsets, traditional culture. And what I've noticed in all of the agile transformations, almost all of the agile transformations that I've been engaged in over the course of the, last 11 or so years, something like that, is that where people are successful, they begin to shift the way they relate to each other. Where a transformation is successful, people shift the way they relate, they shift the way they connect. They are able to go a little bit deeper into conversation together. And what's possible for the relationships that emerge in these spaces is greater than it was before. They're almost sort of creating, in the ORS world, maybe a spiral dynamics or an integral standpoint. The relationship itself is actually creating more intelligence, or is of more intelligence, is capable of handling greater complexity. And turns out that when people are leading from that space, when they are sort of working in that space, they are able to shift their organization, shift the people around sort of an agile transformation around a focus on structure, a focus on process, potentially a focus on, proximity to customer, or bringing the customer close to your design or creative thinking and that kind of thing. And it's almost like if you have the ability to sort of step into these connecting conversations and you train for that, you sort of create spaces in the organization where people can actually practice these skills. I think it's important to sort of connect these skills back to some of the basic things that we learn, when we're sort of stepping into coaching for the first time: listening skills, asking powerful questions, articulating what's going on, and so on and so forth. If we're able to sort of have those kinds of peer-based conversations, a practice space that's outside of the organizational hierarchy, what we're in essence doing is almost sort of creating like a second set of water coolers where people are not using their title or their positional authority to sort of move conversations forward. Rather, there's sort of a space where you can have both open inquiry, more psychological safety in service of deeper relationships and more open participatory conversations than you might have had before. And, the essence of these supporting skills, which I sort of consider at this point to be essential for anyone who's, and by anyone, I mean, a whole organization that's going through some sort of a transformation. I say some sort of, could be agile, could be something else that they're trying to do. In essence, these skills are, in my view, absolutely critical. It's a practice, right? It's something that you actually practice. Okay. And that's the essence here. It's a set of simple skills that, you'll pick up if you are spending time in the basic professional coaching space. It's a set of skills that you'll pick up if you are, working with liberating structures. It's a set of skills if you're working with a little bit of the integral thinking. You'll pick these skills up. But what I've done is I've tried to distill them down to something that is really approachable, really simple, but very effective when you have large groups of people. And right now I have about 110 people in 4 different cohorts running through these exercises, practicing not on just sort of irrelevant conversations, actually practicing these skills on conversations and questions that the organization is struggling with in the course of their agile transformation.
So I just want to pause here for a second. I want to highlight what you said. These are skills that could be learned. They're not really something that, and people may think that, okay, these are just some sort of abstract, things that we always talk about, like, oh, we need to listen better or ask better questions or articulate what's going on. But I noticed similar patterns when I work with teams and organizations, is this idea that, okay, let's get a group of people together and let's start to do work. And what you're saying is, okay, we need to kind of pause or at least have some sort of an intention around like building a relationship and be intentional about improving that relationship as we work together before we start like do work, not just focus on the tasks, but also on the relationship.
Right. Absolutely. And the additive piece there to sort of like really make this kind of different is the idea that there is a set of skills, certain set of skills that you can put together. If you practice those skills, you'll become a more effective communicator, a more effective relator. You'll be better equipped to deal with the challenges that occur in relationships when people exist in polarities, right? Or exist in cognitive dissonance, where, we're asking, for example, we're asking an organization that has had quite a hierarchical management structure to now shift to self-organization. And there's a struggle in I need clarity. What am I doing right now? And there's an expectation that will come from the hierarchy, as it always has. And at the same time, we're sort of trying to invite self-organization into the space. And that can be exceptionally dislocating for people. And if you have, you can do this with agile coaches, right? We can put 40 or 50 agile coaches into a space, and we're all kind of trained in the professional coaching skills and so on that will allow us to support our teams in this way. But the other piece here is, like, if you actually embed these skills into the organization, you're creating a group of people who have far better skills for these connected relationships, such that the quality or the nature of conversations that start to happen around them, the questions they ask, the way they listen, the way they sort of are able to presence what's happening in a situation, the way they're able to sort of work through peer coaching conversations where there's a bit of conflict, is significantly different, to the point where actually it starts feeling different when you have, like, one case, I have about 100 people, and they're out there in a department of like about 300 or so folks. And we started with about 16, and through organic growth, basically started seeing more and more and more people kind of coming to the table to have these conversations, to relate in this way. And the value there, is immense for an organization, particularly if they're putting all this pressure on people to change their mindsets, but forgetting that in order to change, some of the fundamental structures, the sense-making mechanisms, it's really useful to have a different set of skills in order to relate to each other, so that you are able to, in a group setting, practice things differently and think about your change or the transformation, the change that's necessary for your organization differently. So it's proven quite powerful.
I want to get into the skills that you mentioned as you were talking about, like, there are some skills that came from professional coaching, but they are not necessarily only coaching skills. They are skills that any organization can start to apply or foster in their culture. But as you and I know, they require a lot of practice. And so you identified 7 of them, like you call them the 7 essential relational skills. What's the first one that you usually start with?
I've done quite a bit of work with the thinking and the practices and approach of Peter Block. And Peter Block has this great book called Community, The Structure of Belonging.
That book have been on my list for a while, and I just bought it on Amazon the other day.
Fantastic. Yeah. So in that, he sort of says they're kind of like five different kinds of conversations that, you can have in a group. And he starts with questions, like we all do. So the very first skill, even before listening, is actually getting comfortable asking questions, like not just any questions, powerful questions. And of course, the CTI work shows up quite a bit here. Other work from, a number of different folks shows up here. Because once again, to your point, it's not necessarily about the content. It's about the simplicity of the skill that you're trying to embed in the organization and the consistency with which it is applied. If people are practicing with something, they tend to get a whole lot better, a whole lot quicker, to a point, of course. And what I do with these 7 skills is we start with powerful questions, because that's kind of like one of the foundational components. If you're living in inquiry about, why do these things work? How does this function? What's my role here? What am I experiencing for myself here? Like, people will tend to begin to ask the questions themselves. So you, as a facilitator or a coach, don't necessarily need to ask the questions of them. And you can have those beautiful moments where all you do is you as a coach, you sort of are listening to someone, and they're basically talking themselves through their challenge, and you nod and go, and then they come to their own fantastic, amazing resolution or conclusion and say, that was a great conversation.
Yeah.
And that's actually, if you sort of spend the time and attend to people's ability to ask themselves these powerful questions and ask each other these powerful questions, it desensitizes them to sort of sitting with the unknown. And to me, that's a very powerful step. And it's also one of those steps, if you do it early on, it pays enormous dividends for the rest of the program, the rest of the effort.
So that resonates with me a lot. I recently wrote a post on becoming a better coach based on, my journey in professional coaching. And I came, like, that was the hook for me, powerful questions. How do I frame a question that can help, the team team or people I work with to kind of have this inquiry, reflect on things that they've done. And even if they don't know the answer, I think the idea is not to come up with the answer. It's actually maybe we need to come up with a better question.
Absolutely. I mean, there's that great quote by Rainer Maria Rilke where he sort of says, he talks about living into the question, and then some distant day living into the answer. And, for folks who are used to taking action and delivering and just kind of getting things done, that's kind of a difficult thing to do, to allow the space and creating comfort in allowing that space is one of the things that I try really, really hard, particularly early on in these sessions, to achieve.
I think that's really important, that keyword that you just mentioned, the space. I often say, like, the question will set the direction. Where are we going? And if that question created that space of, as you mentioned in the beginning, like the safety or psychological safety, and we're not rushing to answer, then that can give us this idea of being okay with the unknown, which is the essence of the philosophy of Agile and other ideas as well, the growth mindset.
Yeah.
So you start with the question, and that's and even like beyond the question, you have like that creates some sort of a space around that inquiry space. But what's the next skill?
So the next skill is what I term integral listening. And by putting the term integral in there, I'm meaning sort of whole body, whole spirit listening. It's essentially the listening skills that you might learn in a CTI program or a Agile Coaching Foundations, the ACF, I think IC Agile calls it. It's that set of skills, because once you've posed the question, you put a stimulus out there into the world, and you will get a response, and you need to listen for that response. And the value of practicing listening, it becomes immediately apparent when you start asking powerful questions, because you need to be listening not for confirmation of fact. You're listening for deeper meaning. You're listening with your whole being for the energetic content of an experience or of someone's response to something you've posed to them. So the first 4 sessions usually of the cohort are starting with powerful questions, but by the end, so it's almost like by the end of the first 4 sessions, you're practicing these skills simultaneously, and I'm sort of creating a space in which you can go and engage in a peer coaching conversation, or just have a conversation, a deeper conversation, practicing your powerful questions with the people who are in that particular cohort or in that particular practice group. And it seems simple, but like many simple things, it requires a lot of time and effort to master and to understand how you might practice better. I don't think there's a single conversation that takes place in these sessions that people don't come out and say, I asked them 3 questions. What happened to your conversation? What happened to your connection? And what is possible now for the relationship? And you're going in the right direction when the conversation is deeper, the connection or relationship has improved or is feeling stronger, and what is possible for that relationship is expanded. It's greater. And, we spend so much time in organizations sort of saying to people, no, don't do this, and sort of fix this, and orientation or biases towards problems, right?
Yeah.
And solving problems. And this sort of creates space for things that are conversations that are beyond just solving problems. It's sort of more expansive, more conversations about possibility, potential. So it makes it easier to dream together. And when you can dream together, you can be together.
I think that sense of expansion is really something that I experienced when I was in professional coaching training through CTI. Like, a lot of times, as you said, there are simple skills, but when you first try to take a couple of minutes, or maybe 2 to 3 minutes, to just listen to someone fully without any interruptions, and just like you called it, like integral listening. You're not just listening to the words, but you're listening to the whole experience. What are they experiencing? So your focus is fully on them. Most of the time, we're focused on what's happening in our head and how we're going to reply to the person. So we're not really listening. And that takes a lot of practice. There's a saying or a quote like, we often listen to reply and not to understand. And that's the listening that usually happens, is like, I'm listening, and now I need to find, what am I going to say? me.
Right.
So that's the first one, is asking powerful question. The second is listening, or integral listening, as you called it. What comes next?
So the third skill is really just noticing. So noticing what's going on and sort of articulating, hey, I noticed. So it's a skill of observation. And in some ways it's sort of an expansion of sort of this idea of whole body listening. But the kinds of exercises that we engage in when we're doing this, we often go into triads, and obviously on Zoom or Google Meeting, now that they have breakout rooms, but you have three people. One person is an observer and is just sitting there practicing the skill. The other two folks are kind of like in conversation, asking powerful questions, listening, sort of working through maybe a challenge that one of them is identified in their space, that they're seeking advice from a colleague, from a peer, to help solve a particular challenge. So that's basically kind of rounds out, I guess, the first three critical skills. What I really like about the noticing or the articulating what's going on is it makes it okay. It creates a little bit of safety in sort of saying, hey, I just noticed this. I'm curious about that. Or, I noticed this in myself. I'm really anxious about this. And one of the sort of extensions to this is, okay, so you're using words to describe your emotions. And what I've found, and I'm sure others have found this too, is like when you experience someone talking about how they're doing from an emotional content perspective in the workplace, it's often, using words that Susan David, the psychologist from Harvard, talks about as umbrella words, meaning they protect you from the rain or the shine and the full experience of what that emotion is, basically because it's like, how are you doing? Well, I'm fine. And, you may not be fine. Same thing. Oh, well, I'm sad. I'm angry, and what we're asking people to do is in that noticing is actually kind of develop a little bit of a deeper relationship with themselves and their own emotional content so that they're able to pinpoint with greater certainty, or I guess greater clarity is a better word. Clarity is a better word here. The emotional content or the emotional response that they have to something going on. And here there's work, I think it was Kierkegaard, one of the Viennese philosophers said, Wittgenstein said, limits of my language are the limits of my world. And when we are unable to sort of frame our internal experience in a meaningful way for ourselves and potentially for others, it makes it very difficult to sort of pause what's going on and use our full self as a sensory organ, if you will, for transformational experience or transformational context.
It's really trying to hone in on the experience of what's going on. And usually the word that comes up for me, at least when I'm listening to someone, is now. What's happening now? What's going on right now? And that's what I think you're pointing to is, okay, how do we notice and point out what's happening? I took the ORSC intelligence, one of the courses, ORSC intelligence course, and that noticing sometimes can be multi-sensory, as you said. Like it could be like a change in voice, it could be a change in facial expression, it could be just a move. So noticing that can provide and enrich the story or the experience for the person who's telling it and give them the expansion that you were talking about earlier. These are essential skills. They're critical as a coach or in a coaching role or as a team member or a leader. So they are not just skills that are for a specific role. They're skills that can improve the conversation and connection across the organization. And I mean, I think it's all even something, everyone in society could could learn and improve on.
I could not agree more with that. I mean, it was a surprise to me just to see, as we sort of organically scaled this in a particular organization, just how profound the change was. And what I realized then was these coaching skills, and a lot of them are coaching skills, these coaching skills that we sort of work with are teachable, especially if you practice a lot. And that's the critical thing. There isn't any kind of, new genius in the skills. It's just, how we put them together, and that the fact that there are groups of people who are diligently practicing the skills step by step in a particular order and sequence. And that's basically bringing them to a place where they're able to have conversations and build relationships that are able to hold a lot more complexity, relationships that skip levels in an organizational hierarchy that basically, lots of organizations are like
how do we flatten our hierarchy? Well, this is pointing to how you might begin that process, is actually have people, not a leadership team practicing together, but, have several cohorts with, one or two members of a leadership team practicing with everyone else, realizing that just like every other human being, even like every professional athlete, you still practice the skills, the basic skills. One of the great things about the idea of mob programming is every morning in a mob, at least how I've sort of seen it, that mobs run is first 60 minutes of the day is like, hey, there's some things that we want to learn about, that we want to like really develop our skills in. Let's practice. Well, that's basically what this is. But instead of sort of practicing with building software, we're practicing with building capabilities around relational skills and conversational skills and connection skills, and the things that really are important to create the sustaining connections in an organization, particularly as it's moving through a transformational experience.
It gives us a space to nurture that relationship rather than just like the focus is mostly on tasks. That's not something that I'm saying or you're saying. Like it's something that a lot of research and different domains have pointed to. I did some studying leadership circle work, and one of the things that they talk about is balancing task focus with relationship orientation. Because if you focus too much on the tasks, then it's just like becomes like really dry and stiff, and things don't move as smoothly. And if you focus just on relationship, things might not get done. So you want to balance those two. So those are the three essential or main skills, basic skills that you highlighted here. Do you want to go through the other four briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. So once we've sort of like focused a little bit on personal skills and pair kind of conversations, then we start to get into more of a group situation. So the next area is really running meetings using liberating structures, or using liberating structures to create greater participation in the space. I try to simplify and connect with the organization and the language used in the organization at the time, which means the conversation you and I are having is not the conversation that I would have with anyone who isn't necessarily kind of in the coaching space. And over time, we will absolutely get to a place where we can have this kind of a conversation where we can actually go quite deep into what the content is. So it's this idea of how do you create a container with the appropriate and structured appropriate invitation, sequencing of events, grouping of people, grouping of ideas. What questions do you seed a space like that with? Then there's the idea of self as instrument, and that comes from a body of knowledge called integral facilitation, which is a really, really interesting space. It's sort of Zen informed practice by a few very, very interesting folk out there in the world, and there's an organization that supports that work called 10 Directions. It's really powerful in terms of self-management, self-awareness, and it's sort of the extra layer that you need in terms of noticing what's going on to really kind of deepen that practice. There's a lot of self-practice in there. Then I have a section called, a couple of modules called Conversational Journeys, where we talk about different kind of processes. So advice seeking as a process, as opposed to, going to someone and asking for approval. How do you go, to someone in an organization and ask for advice instead of asking them to make a decision or to approve something for you? So there's that. In that space, there's also sort of more formalized practice around arc of the coaching conversation, as well as some of the content in conflict resolution. And then the last section that I sort of consider to be essential is this idea of working with polarities. And working with polarities is sort of one of those skills that's not really too widely, I guess, kind of widely taught or widely experienced. But in the work that I've done with it, to me, it's sort of created a frame in which you can experience multiple perspectives, examine them, pick them up, examine them, and put them back down again, examine yours, and, potentially kind of find a way to take an integral perspective on things, which is, both of these polarities, both poles of polarities are in fact true simultaneously. And that's sort of a transcendent space to sort of step into. So those are the 7 skills. And, the idea is really to sort of create some conversation around how people are actually operating with these. So as the cohorts get more mature, they start to trust each other. They feel more comfortable, sharing with each other as they kind of go forward. And then the conversation becomes, how do we make these practices more scalable in our organization? How do we make them our own? How do we get rid of you, Ewan, so that we can actually embed these things in the way that we do things. And to me, that's the greatest honor and privilege, is to be able to step away, because, at that point I know either, well, it's going to stick or it isn't, but at least we have, a group of people who have some skills and the courage to actually go and try those skills out in their context, in their organization.
These are very important skills, and the level of awareness that's needed sometimes requires a little bit of a, like you said, it's built on being inquisitive, being, having some sort of an inquiry in the questions that we ask, but also allowing the space to not know the answer to some of the questions. And even when we have the answers, like that last skill that you mentioned about like polarities and different perspectives, it is okay not to have just the answer or one answer.
Yeah.
We could work with different perspectives and find what emerges from there and what's possible now that we have different perspectives. To me, they look like you have the foundational skills and the three skills that you started with, or we talked about in the beginning, and then based on those, you're building more muscles around like more advanced skills.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly been the experience, and occasionally we'll need to go back and sort of pull people along again, invite them into, hang on a second, I think we should be practicing our powerful questions, just our powerful questions. But I've had the luxury of being able to both have a willing client to support and sustain the work, and the willingness of the participants to go there. And to sort of say, okay, great, let's practice. Let's get onto the mat in the dojo and practice these skills. Because, just like a professional athlete, you're still, you might be Steph Curry, but you're still throwing or shooting 3-pointers and practicing 3-pointers again and again and again and again, honing your skills, and we do have in most organizations, because of the context specific nature of what an organization happens to be doing, you might have the world expert in a particular very narrow, or the team of world experts in a particularly narrow sort of part of their value stream right there. No one else is as good as them at doing their jobs in their organization as that group there. And, people should be practicing like professional athletes, particularly the things that are critical to, modern, collaborative, flattened, people-centric organizations, in my view. Anyway.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Like if you look at professional athletes or in sports, they practice and do the basic and the simple things well and better than anybody else, rather than just trying to do like a lot of things unwell. So the question thinking is really something that I'm fascinated by, and I there's an organization that I learned with. It's called the Inquiry Institute, and they have this idea of question thinking. In fact, one of the books that I highly recommend is this book called "Change Your Question, Change Your Life" by Marilee Adams, I believe. And it's not easy to think in terms of questions, because we're almost like programmed, or this idea that we have to come up with the answer all the time, this need to give the answer. So these are all really critical, essential skills that organizations could really use and apply and see results over time. I mean, I think each one of those skills can take one full episode. But is there anything else that you want to share or leave us with?
So, I mean, the critical thing here is to recognize that we as humans have evolved to be collaborative creatures for a very long time. In fact, very often it's actually untraining ourselves that's more important than training ourselves to be more collaborative and communicative and sort of better when we're with ourselves. So there's no high prior art in this, really, just like in the Agile Manifesto where it says we are uncovering. Well, my belief is that by practicing in a dojo, in a group of people intentionally in a relatively safe, and I say relatively safe space, a space where there are agreements and what have you that are in place, hold the energy of the container, is a fantastic way to uncover, what's true for you in the way that you relate authentically in the world. And that honestly is a tremendous gift. And it's the gift that I experience when doing this work.
Same here. I think that's really something that is fulfilling, to see someone or a team or a group of people, or someone who has been trying to find the answer, shift focus to find what is it that I want to answer, what's the question that I want to ask myself. And so that level of awareness that takes place feels good to see that person is actually expanding and growing, not continue to be in that same space or comfort zone. And I think that's exactly like when you say, relatively safe, there needs to be a little bit of discomfort for us to grow, right? So that even there's safety, but there's also like a sense of that, okay, you're gonna step in and something will happen that will shift the way you think about things. So,
absolutely.
So have you written anything about the 7 skills that we can point people to?
Have a look on my LinkedIn page. They're going to be showing up there probably around about the same time that this podcast goes live.
Okay. Yeah.
Give me a date, Salah. Give me a date. I'll be very good at executing against that.
Yeah, I'm glad we were able to connect and sharing these skills with people, and I hope that people find this useful and take something away. I definitely took a lot to consider here, and it made me think about things I wasn't thinking about. Any last comments before we wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity to chat. It's really good to reconnect with you, and I feel so positive that we have such a great community of people who are doing this work in the world. My view, Agile is beyond just building products and helping organizations improve. I mean, there's an aspect of it which is really helping society and people in society improve, and it's the privilege and honor of my life to be doing this work with such a great community of people. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really deeply appreciate it.
Thank you, Ewan. This has been a pleasure connecting with you and learning from you. As you said, Agile is not just building products, it's about interactions and dialogue and the skills that you shared. And we continue to explore our dialogue, relationships, and connections. So appreciate your insights and wisdom here.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, thank you for listening. I hope this conversation gave you something to think about or take action on. Remember, take action and get clarity, then repeat.